Today, I'm going on a sartorial journey with journalist and author Dylan Jones OBE. Dylan studied at Chelsea School of Art and then St Martin's School of Art. He was the award-winning editor of GQ magazine and has won the British Society of Magazine Editors Editor of the Year award a record 11 times. In 2013, he was the recipient of the Mark Boxer Award. Under his editorship, the magazine won over 80 awards. A former editor at ID, The Face, Arena, The Observer, and The Sunday Times, he's a former media columnist for The Guardian, a former columnist for The Independent, and is the author of the Sunday Times bestseller David Bowie, Alive, and the New York Times bestseller Jim Morrison, Dark Star, as well as 25 other books, including his recently published Faster Than a Cannonball, 1995 and all that. He was the executive producer of the 2020 BBC One show Idris Elba Meets Paul McCartney and produced a 4-part series of the 80s for BBC Two last autumn. In 2022, he launched a film production company, Beacon Films, with Maggie Todd from Disney. I'm exhausted, Dylan. That is the most unbelievable career to date. So thank you for making the time today.
Very nice to see you.
It's
Very
great
nice
to see you too. It really is. So maybe we should start with, what's your earliest sartorial memory? When did you first realize the impact of clothes?
When I was 12 years old, and like a lot of people from my generation, I saw David Bowie on Top of the Pops. And it's when he performed Starman, and it was the summer, I think it was June or July 1972. And at that point, Top of the Pops was probably watched by 12.5, 13 million people, which is then it was a sort of 25% of the population of the UK. But I think if you were an impressionable teenager, like I was at the time, you felt that David Bowie was talking directly to you. I thought he was talking directly to me. And that's a very important part of that generation, very important part of pop culture. And David Bowie was introduced to many people's lives through that performance. So two things. The first thing is that I remember the last significant conversation I had with my father before he died would have been Christmas, about 12, 13 years ago. And he asked me what I was doing. And I said, well, blah, blah, blah. And I'm doing this book on David Bowie's appearance on Top of the Pops. He said, really? And he let me wang on about this, and I was talking about the music and the emotional pull and the color and the lights and everything. And he let me talk for about 10 minutes. And he said, you do realize we had a black and white television, don't you? So a lot of this stuff that we remember from our past is sort of received information. But to go back to your question, after we'd all seen that extraordinary performance on Top of the Pops, some people wanted to dress like David Bowie. Some people wanted to buy his records. Some people wanted to go and see him in concert. I wanted his hair. So a couple of days later, I summoned up the courage to call around the various, I think they were called unisex hair salons at the time. I was 12 years old. It's quite a brave thing to do. It's not brave, but I mean, it's an unusual thing to do for a 12-year-old boy. So I called up all these unisex salons and said, I'd like to come in and have a David Bowie haircut, please. And for all the very young people who are listening to your podcast, obviously at the time, he had a shock of flame hair, which was very, very unusual. No one knew what I was talking about, apart from one person who said, come in. So the Saturday, sort of 10 days later, I went into this hair salon shaking, and with a picture of David Bowie, saying, I want to look like that.
A colour picture, clearly.
Yeah. I said, I want orange hair like that. And I had long hair, like sort of shoulder length hair that was really thin.
Yeah.
And the guy just said, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I said, is there anything you can do? So he started cutting, and I left the salon looking like Dave Hill, who was the guitarist in Slade, so my first attempt at being fashionable sort of failed dismally. But that was the first time I understood really the power of fashion, and also the power of a man wearing clothes that had a very powerful effect on people.
And after you'd had the hair done, did you raid the secondhand shops and try and pull together the David Bowie look?
Uh, Not really, but I think it made me aware that you, clothes were very important. Plus, we were all reaching the age of puberty, girls, peer pressure, school, and so people were starting to dress in particular ways anyway. The other thing that people always forget is that you can't just replicate something because no one had any money.
No, exactly, and
So
that's
you would, like you say, you'd go to junk shops, you'd cut things, you'd wear sparkly socks, you'd do all these little things to try and create some kind of look without trying not to look ridiculous.
and we didn't have the benefit of the high street and all of the fast fashion
Yeah,
labels that the kids do now. We had to be a lot more creative back then.
yeah. And I kind of think we were. And that became even more apparent a couple of years later when punk happened. Um, and when that happened, that was again another kind of seismic shock pop culturally, and it overnight, not overnight, over a period of about 6 months, seriously changed the way that a lot of young people dressed, including myself, who went from being a sort of long-haired layabout to someone who was at Chelsea School of Art around the corner, with short hair and leather jackets and all that kind of stuff, you know.
I was going to say, when you then had your major clubbing days,
Yeah.
from what I understand, um, do you remember your clubbing looks at the time?
Oh, I mean, I s I mean, I did a lot of clubbing, probably too much. I probably spent 10 years in nightclubs, and, yeah, I spent a fortune on clothes. It was all about dressing up. It was the decade of late 70s to late 80s. It was all about dressing up. I wore some, I mean, extraordinary things. In fact, I've kept a few things. Most of them, I had a rail. I used to live in Brixton in a small flat, and I had a rail of clothes, and I had a bust up with my girlfriend in 1984, and she still had keys to the flat. And I came in,
Oh, no.
yeah,
No. What
all,
did she do?
everything.
No.
I walked in. The flat was not much bigger,
What had you done,
twice.
Dylan?
Well, I don't want to talk about that, but it was like twice the size of this desk, very small bed, rail of clothes, and she'd been there for like a couple of hours, and she'd literally cut up everything. Galliano, Hamnet,
Ah.
Isiniaki, Stephen Linnard, all of this stuff just cut up. Baswegian loafers, all, it was terrible. Bin bags full of all these little, I should have kept the labels actually.
I was going to say, did you wear any of the partly shredded
The only
clothes?
thing that was left was a black MA1 flying jacket, a pair of Catherine Hamnet trousers, and the Lokes loafers that I was wearing. But I remember about 6 or 7 years ago, I've got two daughters. One's 21, one's 24. And the year when Georgia, my younger daughter, was allowed to go to school without wearing a uniform, obviously they all get very, you know, they put a lot of attention on what they wear to go to school. So one morning I'm letting her out of the house, and she's, I think, 16, and she's wearing black MA1 flying jacket, white
Yours?
t-shirt. No.
No.
It is all her clothes. Black MA1 flying jacket, white t-shirt, Levi 501s, a logo belt with Gucci on it, white socks, and a pair of oxblood Lokes loafers. And I looked at her and I said, "You're not going to believe this, but in 1986, I was wearing exactly the same clothes." She was horrified.
Oh, but that must have been such a cool moment for you, and seeing your beautiful daughter wearing that look, but in a contemporary way.
Well, I thought so, but she just thought it
She
was the
was
worst thing
mortified.
in the world. She was mortified. So I found a picture that had been in a magazine, and then that night she came out, and I showed it to her, and I said, "Look," and he said, "I look nothing like that. You're ridiculous." And of course, that was it. But
Were you in a school uniform?
yeah,
Yeah.
I probably was.
Yeah.
Although I got thrown out of school for not wearing the school uniform, I seem to remember, because I've never thought I'd been particularly interested in clothes, but looking back and answering your questions, I think I probably have been. But I remember why I was thrown out of school, because I was wearing, it would have been 75 Oxford bags, green pinstripe Oxford bags, spoon shoes, a shirt with a butterfly collar with a little sort of repeated pattern of a French cafe scene on it.
So you went from this crazy clubbing world
Yeah,
into the magazine world.
yeah.
How did that impact on your style? I mean, you must have evolved your style quite rapidly, or
Not
not?
not really, because for the first 10 years when I was working at ID and then the Face and Arena, you were working in an environment which is independent publishing. You were working with the same people you were going out with in the evening. It was all about clubs and music and fashion and style and what have you, culture. So it really changed when the beginning of the 90s, I stopped working in magazines and went to work in newspapers. And I just thought, this is a different world. As a journalist, you're not really taken seriously unless you do work um, for a paper, at least for a certain period of time. And that's what I always used to tell the young guys who came to work for me. I said, you've done this, you've had the best training in this world. Now you need to go off and do something in newspapers. And I think that's still the case.
And did you have to change your style when you went to work for newspapers then?
I didn't have to, but
You chose to.
but I chose to.
Yeah.
So I wore suits,
Yeah.
and that's pretty much what I've worn ever since, is a suit.
Dapper
I'm
Dylan,
really
I
boring.
think of you as Dapper Dylan. And then, so from papers to Conde Nast, I always think of sort of Conde Nast Vogue House. It's quite a hotbed of style, as you would imagine it to be. Did that change your style at all?
I don't think so. In fact, when we launched about 11 years ago, we launched Men's Week, which was quite an exciting thing to do at the time. Caroline Rush, the CEO of the BFC, and myself launched Men's Week. And for about 4 or 5 years, it was very successful. And invariably, at the beginning of Fashion Week, there would be, and they were always Japanese for some reason. There'd always be a couple, and they'd come and want to do an interview. And their question would always be, they'd always ask a question like, "What's your style regime?" Something like this. And I say, well, I get up in the morning, I put a white shirt on, a blue suit, and a pair of black shoes, and then I walk to work. And they were invariably disappointed. So, but yeah, I wore suits. I mean, I suppose what happened is that I migrated to Savile Row, because I'd started having suits made for me when I was 24. And this wasn't out of any particular adherence to style. It was because in the 80s, if you bought a suit, they were really boxy. They were all double-breasted, very boxy. And of course, I was skinny, and it just looked like someone had thrown a tent over a beanpole. So to actually wear something, I had to go and get something made. So I started quite young. So 24 was when I first started having suits made.
Who did you go to then?
I went to a man called Jack Geach
Yeah.
in Harrow, who made suits for teddy boys.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
And did you go to him in Harrow for fittings or?
Oh, yeah. And I'd go there, and I looked like a freak from nightclubs, and I was surrounded by all these teddy boys, quite elderly and quite rough, and it was an experience. And then after that, I went to a guy called Chris Rocco in Kentish Town, who had a tailor called Phillips, who was an ex-boxer. And he made suits for Spandau Ballet, for Wham, for lots of people, lots of pop stars at the time. And what George Michael used to do, George Michael used to go to this shop in South Molton Street, which was called Bazaar, and he used to ask if he can borrow a lot of clothes with a view to buying something. So what he would do is he'd borrow all these clothes, he'd buy a couple of things to keep them happy, and you get Chris to copy all this stuff.
No.
Yeah.
It was very much that era, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Whose style would you really rate, do you say?
I'm very conservative. I like old school, traditional Hollywood glamour. I think that that's a period that you can't really beat. It's when traditional role models were fashionable, and regardless of anyone's sexuality, and it was formal, and it was about dressing well for a purpose. And I like that. I like dressing up for things, whether it's a charity do or a date, or not anymore, obviously. But
I was going to say,
but you
date
know
with
what I
your
mean.
wife.
So it's I think that's important. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that the ability to be individual these days is obviously, it's kind of exponential, and it's fantastic that people have the freedom to wear what they like and do what they like. But I do think that there's a formality about dressing well, particularly for men, which is important.
I totally agree. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that because obviously, the style and fashion world has evolved hugely, and you've got sort of celebrities, on the catwalks now, sort of really intertwined. You've got reality TV stars there, walking the recent Balenciaga show. What are your thoughts on that?
On what?
On celebrities now becoming part of the fashion world?
Oh, I think it's fine. I mean, it's the things develop. I think that the red carpet. I was talking about this with my business partner the other day, who, is, as you said, was at she worked for Disney for a very long time. And we're talking about the importance of red carpet. The thing is, if you have a good red carpet event, that's your marketing campaign now. You don't need anything else. And you actually don't need to employ photographers either. You need a red carpet event, and you have Instagram, and that's kind of it. And that's your marketing. What do I think about it? I'm not sure. I think it's just a natural evolution of the way that various industries have changed. It's the introduction of new technologies into this world. And in some respects, it's made commerce easier. It's made publicity easier. And having spent a lot of time working with young designers who would bust a gut and spend every penny they had in order to put on a fashion show. In fact, often I would say, don't do a show.
Yeah.
Just put it into your business. You don't need a show.
Yeah.
But obviously they're very proud and they wanted to be part of the whole system. But even though it's tougher now for younger designers, I think that things like Instagram and social media in general have enabled them to use media in a different and cheaper way. And that's good.
I think that's great. I mean, then can I just quickly ask you, Kanye West, recent goings on?
Well, everything that I've read is appalling. And everything that I've read totally negates anything that he's done before. I mean, I can't say because I haven't heard him say these things to me, but everything that has been mediated so far leads me to think that this is a side of his personality, the ugly side of his personality, which, like I say, it kind of negates any amazing creativity that he possesses.
Yes, it's a shame, isn't it?
It is. It's a terrible shame. Yeah.
Just talking about male artists, musicians, creatives, if you could pick three, who would you consider to be the most stylish or inspirational?
Performers.
Performers, creatives.
I think that Bowie we've already talked about. I think that Harry Styles is really carrying the flag. But also, I think you can't ignore someone like Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger was cool in his teens, in his 20s, pretty much every decade. I took my daughters to see the Stones in the summer last year, and they'd never seen them before. And they just thought it was one of the best concerts they'd ever seen, principally because of Jagger's energy and the fact that he's very comfortable. And I think in order to be stylish, particularly if you're a performer, you have to be comfortable. If you're not comfortable, you just look like someone's giving you some stuff to wear.
Yes, I've always felt very strongly you've got to really own your clothes.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you feel uncomfortable and people around you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, someone like Jay-Z has that confidence.
Yes.
We did an event with him once, and he's just very, very cool. And I think it's that thing that cool is such a commodity these days. And actually, it goes back to that whole thing: you've got it or you haven't got it.
Yeah. You can't buy it, can you?
Well, we are in an industry where you can buy it, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Anyone who you look at that you think, oh, that's really not working, that's really try too hard.
Yeah.
Like? You're not going to be drawn on that.
No, I mean, I think a lot of entertainers, a lot of pop stars, dress. But I mean, I remember when we shot Ed Sheeran for the cover of GQ years ago, and I said we were going to do this, and the features team just looked at me like I was an idiot. They said, "There's no way you can make him look cool." And actually, I think we did in the end, but I'm not sure to what great aim. Because his thing is looking like a busker, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But he owns that.
yeah, he owns quite a lot now. He's quite rich.
Yeah, you're right there. You're right there. Coming back to brands and tailors, and who are you really rating on Savile Row right now? Because I think Savile Row is this glorious global hub of brilliant craftsmanship and skill.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think there's anywhere like it in the world. And I'd be really interested to hear your opinion, because you've been so immersed in the men's style world for the last several decades.
Well, I think that now, even though COVID has thrown up so many challenges, not least because it's made it impossible for people to do trunk shows, which is where they make a lot of their money, as you know. I actually think that there's more of a level playing field now in Savile Row than there's ever been before. And I think the issue now is getting trade back. I mean, during Freeze Week, because of the dollar, London was awash with Americans. It felt like some sort of semblance of normalcy. But it has been challenging. But even 20 years ago, I think there was such a sort of clash between old school Savile Row and the new boys like Oswald and Richard James. I don't think that's the case anymore, and I think it's possible to have a really genuine traditional Savile Row experience, whether you're in Anderson and Shepherd or Richard James or Oswald or wherever. I mean, I don't think there's a person I know on Savile Row who A, I don't like, and B, I don't have any respect for. I mean, they all work fantastically hard. They're all really good at their jobs, and they're all not the last bastion, because I think there's been a certain amount of regeneration, but they are flying a flag for British craftsmanship and creativity, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I always think of you as Dapper Dylan. When do you feel that you really nailed your look that you have now?
I just think through repetition. And I think that if you are in the media and you're visible, I think you need a certain kind of look just for recognition's sake. If you do TV and stuff, and so I tended to look the same. I tended to wear things which were very, very similar, because I think you kind of confuse people. And also, if you're representing a brand, which I was, that brand very much felt like, I suppose I tried to dress like the brand,
Yeah.
which was navy blue suit, white shirt. I mean, it's not very interesting, but I think it's the way you do it.
I was going to say, it's the detail, isn't it? The devil's in the detail, your
Yeah.
beautiful pocket scarf that you've got on. The first day you didn't go into Vogue House,
Yeah.
do you remember what you put on that morning?
Well, it would have been. Are you talking about COVID? Because the thing is, I left we had COVID, we had lockdown, and then I sort of left Conde Nast a year after that. So the thing is, we were already conditioned to not working and dressing in a particular way. And I think that helped in many respects, because I think that we have a house in Wales in the Brecon
Yes.
Beacons,
Yes.
and I think the tendency there is to kind of go feral. You know, it's like
I cannot imagine a feral Dylan. But
oh
what does a
God.
feral Dylan look like in Wales? I'd be fascinated to know.
Well,
Is it the tweed version that I'm seeing today?
no, I don't. You're a bad person, aren't you? No, I don't. I don't dress up, and I don't think I dress up in London. I think I have a uniform, but in the country, it's everything's about practicality. You know this. It's about you wear the clothes that are appropriate for what you're doing, whether you're chopping wood or going for a walk.
So no cashmere?
Okay,
Got you.
quite a lot of cashmere.
Got you. And do you have a writing uniform? Do you have something, not a uniform, but something that you put on when you say, okay, I'm going to really focus on writing today, which you do obviously a lot, but is there something that you feel you have that sort of you come back to again and again?
That's a really interesting question. I've never been asked that before.
Well, that's good.
I think, actually, thinking about it, I think that there is a sense of, I mean, I'm lucky that I can write. I find it easy to write anywhere. If I can write in the back of a cab or on a bus, or
That is such a skill
but
and a gift.
I think that's a very really interesting point that you make. I think it is important, but when I'm at home, I actually do that. I think you have to get up.
Yeah.
Which is a bit, not every writer.
Well, not
gets
every
up,
writer gets up, because a lot of writers write in their PJs or their dressing
but
gowns.
I think you need to dress. I think you need to be formal. I think, yeah, I mean, I would. I think that's very important, because you need to be engaged, I think.
So you're not just in your Laura Piana cashmere trackies.
I'm not going to tell you that.
Fundamentally, who would you say you dress for?
It depends. Sometimes I dress for no one. If I'm out, I think the answer to that is you respect the social situation and you respect the orthodoxies of what you're doing. If I'm going to the cinema, I'm not going to be as smart as I am if I'm coming here or going to the meeting I'm going to after this, or I'm going to a lunch. It's like, okay, the answer is you dress for the venue. So if I'm going to Scott's or a good upmarket fancy restaurant, I will dress for that restaurant. But if I go to my local Argentinian cafe, I'm probably not going to look like this.
Are you in your gauchos? But interesting, in this time of real gender fluidity,
Yeah.
and I think there's some brilliant things going on out there. Are you ever tempted to be a little bit more experimental, a little bit more feminine even?
I've done all that.
But do it again now that you've got all these...
No, nobody wants to see an old guy do that. No, but I mean, I did all that. I spent a decade in nightclubs wearing makeup, wearing dresses, doing all that stuff, and I had a fantastic time. But I don't think my kids want to see me do that.
Probably not. I think kids really do struggle with their parents having done what they are now doing, don't they?
I mean, it's bad enough if I post something on Instagram that they don't like. I literally, a nanosecond later, saying, "Take it down, you're being ridiculous." They're so judgmental.
I love it. You, this sort of
awful people, awful children.
What was your view on the Harry Styles in a dress Vogue cover?
Oh, Harry Styles can do no wrong in my eyes. I think he's a nice person. He's a great person. He's a good pop star. Literally everything about him is fantastic. And I think I know Harry a bit, and I knew him very well in the early days. And I saw him recently on holiday in the summer. And I think that there is a test that most famous people have: arrested development. So if you become famous at 17, you're probably going to stay 17 for the rest of your life. because you're surrounded by people who are
That's
treating you like a
interesting.
17-year-old. And I think often people who achieve success later in life tend to be more even-handed and more balanced because they're not surrounded by sycophants. However, there are a few exceptions, and I think he is certainly one, because he is such a grounded person, and he treats people with respect. And yeah, he's a nice guy. I mean, he deserves his success. But the way that he's driven menswear, it's fantastic.
I
He's a
think
great icon. He's brilliant.
fantastic. And I think it's rather sad when he gets criticized as a straight man for wearing a dress and really the whole gender fluidity.
Me too. I think there is nothing that he does in that world in terms of presentation that is a misstep. I think he's brilliant.
Do you have a style icon?
I don't think so.
You were talking earlier about the Hollywood greats.
I mean, in terms of a creative person, I think David Bowie remains my sort of lodestar, just because he came into my life at a time when I was very impressionable, and I think he returned any sort of investment that we made in him just by being constantly creative and having an extraordinary public creative life. So I'd say it was Bowie, not necessarily sartorially, but he is the person who's probably had the most influence on my life.
You must have had so much fun writing that book.
It was great fun, because as well as wanting to immerse myself more in his world, because I knew him quite well, you wanted to I wanted to do it respectfully, as well as it being very journalistic. But it was quite difficult because I think the reason the book was so successful is it because it had 150 voices in it. It wasn't just my voice. It was 150 people who would knew him in a particular way throughout his life. And some of those people I knew very well, but not all of them. And I think the first communication you have with someone is really important, because I was writing this book just after he died. So I'm writing to you, Amanda, and I'm saying, you knew David Bowie very well. I'd like to interview you for this project. What I say to you then, it basically makes you decide whether you're going to stick or twist. Do I want to do this or do I don't? So that first approach was very, very important, and convincing someone that I was coming from a good place, which I was.
And with Bowie being such a style icon, really, were you very conscious of what you wore when you met him?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, completely.
So take me through that process. When was the first time you met him?
The first time I met him was in a house party, I think in Portobello Road during the Notting Hill Carnival. There's a friend of mine called Cynthia who worked on Absolute Beginners, who had this party, and as he walked into this party, I was having my head shaved over a sink.
Oh God!
And I thought, really, now? Now? But every subsequent time, yeah, of course, you take a lot of care.
And do you remember what you wore that first time that you? Well, probably not, because you had your head over the sink.
I remember the first time I met Brian Ferry, which was we'd had this party in a place called Lipstick Studios. Do you remember Lipstick Studios?
Vaguely.
Big sort of photographic studios back in the 80s. And it was on a Saturday night, and I remember I was meant to be interviewing Brian Ferry in his management office in the King's Road, which I think was called EG at the time. But of course, I hadn't gone home. So I pitched up to this interview. Not only did I not have a recorder, but I was still dressed like. And I remember these trousers I was wearing. They were made for me by a guy called Toby Anderson. He used to be in Funkopolitan. He was going through a period of designing clothes for a brand called Atlas, and he'd made me these trousers, and they were trousers that were kind of made up of swatches.
Yeah.
So that every 2 inches with a different type of fabric.
Patchwork.
Exactly, yeah. And I remember sitting down with a furious hangover in this office, about to interview Brian Ferry, who I'd never met before, who was someone I also idolized as a boy. And he did look at me, and I think he was quite disconcerted by my condition. But he looked at my trousers and said, "Those are the most amazing trousers I've ever seen." And that's all I remember. I don't remember anything else he told me.
Do you think he meant it?
Don't care. No, I don't care.
I mean, turning all the way around, we're now inhabiting this ultra digital world and the metaverse. What's your view in terms of designer clothing on the metaverse?
I'm not sure what you mean.
That brands are
Yeah.
designing NFTs and clothing to sell
Great. Why not?
on the metaverse.
I think it's great. I think, why not? I think that I think when people criticize things like this, I think they always criticize it from a commercial point of view. But also, people buy clothes and invest in consumer goods for many different reasons, and they usually do it to feel good. And I think that if buying clothes for a mythical person, for an avatar or whatever in a digital space makes you feel good, then why not? Why shouldn't you do that? You might be the kind of person that has agoraphobia, or you might not think you're particularly good looking, or you might any of these things. I think it's absolutely fine.
I mean, it does allow a window onto a different world
Yeah.
that you might, you probably may not be able to go and buy a Dolce & Gabbana suit or whatever, but your avatar can wear it.
But also, your avatar might display the kind of characteristics that you don't feel equipped to. You might be more flamboyant. You might have a completely different sexual life.
Yeah.
You might be anything, and that's empowering, and I think that's great.
And it's creative.
Yeah.
And fun. Yeah.
We need to find something to disagree on.
We do, don't we? Well, it's not going to be this one, because you brilliantly created the GQ Men of the Year Awards, which I just think was, really visionary and clever, and, coming back to talking about those red carpet moments.
Yeah.
How did you decide as the editor what you were going to wear? Year after year after year.
I usually wore the sponsor.
Very good answer.
But yeah, I mean, A, you wear the sponsor, but B, you want to look good, but also what you don't want to do is outshine someone famous.
Yeah.
You just don't want to do that. I went to this thing that we were involved with in New York once, and the host came on. He came on in a evening suit, and that scarf that I walked in, he basically had a big scarf like that, and it was like wrapped, and it's basically saying, "I'm here, hi," and you don't want to do that.
No.
You don't want to do that. You want to, it's like never outshine the master. I remember old boss of mine said when he was giving advice, he said, don't, someone's in charge, so just let them be in charge. And I think when you're surrounded by a lot of very famous people, some of whom have fragile egos, also surrounded by all their PR people who have even more fragile egos, then you just have to be slightly, just treat people with respect.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's so true. Did you ever use a high profile event to support a new designer? To wear a new designer?
I would always try and wear young British designers if I thought they were appropriate for me to wear. I mean, there was lots of designers that we championed that I wouldn't wear because I would look ridiculous, and I think they would think I look ridiculous, so it wouldn't reflect well on them. I mean, someone like Charles Jeffrey, who makes amazing clothes, I'm not going to wear his suits because I'm going to look ridiculous. But I love his stuff, and I think he's very, very clever. But I would do it to support Savile Row brands or designers like Oliver Sweeney, where it was something that was more appropriate. Yeah.
I mean, you must have been targeted by so many brands to wear them. That must have been I would imagine there would have been bags full of...
Couldn't possibly comment.
Couldn't comment. No, I didn't think you would. I tried, but hey-ho.
No, I mean, the thing is, if you are in that industry, and I think it's the same now as it was then, people fall over themselves to give you stuff, and they're basically doing it because it's a soft bribe, but that's business. But I think you're a mug if you wear something for commercial reasons. I mean, you wear it because you like it.
Would you say you had a worst fashion moment?
Oh God, how long have you got? Yeah.
However long you've
Um,
got.
a few of the things I kept, I didn't keep much because, like I say, most of it was cut up. Um, but I've kept a few things. I kept my Hard Times jeans, um, which they wanted them for a V&A exhibition in the 80s, about 4 or 5 years ago. The most remarkable thing about them was they had a 28-inch waist.
Oh my
I know,
God, that's
imagine.
tiny.
But then they came back cleaned.
Ah,
Because the whole point of wearing these things, that they stood
they
up
stood
by
up on their
themselves.
own, didn't
Yeah,
they?
and they came back. They dry cleaned them.
Oh no, and dry
Um,
cleaning jeans
but
too.
I had some old Vivienne Westwood, a pirate top. But the thing that my younger daughter liked more than anything else, and now she wears it, it was a jacket by Josh Bonner, which was a bomber jacket with fake fur collar, talons, metal talons at the back, and it had a gigolo on the back in silver plastic.
Did you keep all? Have you kept through the years all of these wonderful
I've kept a lot of
pieces?
them. But I now have quite a large wardrobe full of about 120 suits, of which I probably wear 4.
Wow. What do you do with things when you've had enough of them? Do you charity shop? Do you
I keep them. I'm a terrible hoarder.
and do you spring clean your wardrobe? Do you edit and or is it all in the one wardrobe?
I think that, and I think men traditionally are a bit like this. Is that I have and I probably have more clothes than most men I know, most of my friends anyway. But I tend to wear the same things.
You
I tend to wear. There's probably half a dozen suits I wear, half a dozen jackets. I've got yards of shirts, and I probably wear 6 of them. And they're spread collar white Tommy Hilfiger shirts because I like them. So most of the stuff I have in my wardrobe I don't need and don't wear and should probably get rid of
and the girls raid it.
all the time.
But I
They-
love that, don't you?
No, it really annoys me. One of the last things I got sent at GQ was this amazing Versace robe,
Oh,
really extravagant, black, yellow brocade. It was
I bet they
fantastic
squabbled over
with
it.
my name on the back. It was so bling. It was brilliant. They didn't squabble. They just stole it. I mean, I've got no idea where it is.
I love it. I love the thought of the girls in these beautiful male clothes.
Well, actually, I think that's interesting. I mean, Georgia went to a ball recently in Paris, and I love the way that because I've given them lots of old suits, and they wear it in the kind of smoking way.
Oh, but that's a
It's fantastic.
fantastic
It's
and
really
a
elegant.
beautifully tailored
Yeah.
suit.
Yeah,
And they've got height, haven't they,
they
your
have got
girls?
height. Yeah.
Let's talk about travel. Do you pay particular attention to what your airport look is going to be?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to say I don't, but I do. Yeah.
And how do you like to look in the airport?
In the hope of getting an upgrade. Always turn up. You're smart. You're polite. And let's see what happens.
Says the man probably with the gold for life BA card, I would imagine, because you must have done a lot of traveling.
Well, like you, I like travel, and also I always maintained that I did travel a lot. In fact, I travel a lot still, but I think if you are lucky enough to do it, it pays dividends because it gives your work context.
Completely.
Macro, micro.
Completely.
You know, or else you're in a little bubble here and you think it's actually important, but you go over there and it's not as important as you think it is.
You realise that it's a tiny, tiny bubble that you've just burst out of. Yeah. I would imagine from what you've just said about your 4 favourite suits and your 6 favourite shirts, so you're probably a pretty good packer. Do all of those just go straight into?
I didn't used to be. When I first got together with the woman who became my wife, I would go on holiday with at least 2 suitcases full of stuff I'm never going to wear. And she still edits. We'll go on holiday now, and she says you're not going to wear any that. And so now I'm much better, and I can actually go for a 3-week holiday and take hand luggage.
Which brand would you say is your guilty secret?
I've never believed in guilty secrets. It's like music. If you like something, you
You
like
just
it.
do it.
I remember when I joined Conde Nast, if I was on the stairs in Vogue House like 20 odd years ago, and you met a friend of yours, and I'd say, "Oh, I like your skirt. Where's it from?" Um, and they said they said some, "Oh, it's Top Shop." There would be a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Embarrassment that they'd been caught out shopping cheaply, and pride because they'd bought something that someone had liked. Now I don't think there's any embarrassment at all,
No, not at all.
and nor should there be.
But if you had to choose one brand to wear for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Well, actually, the brand I like the most at the moment, and the brand that I think is doing really clever things in mixing formality with informality, is Brunello Cucinello. Out, eye-wateringly expensive,
Eye-wateringly expensive.
but beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's very Italian, and it's a bit sort of, but it's sort of town and country.
Yeah.
I think that's a really smart way to go.
Yeah. And it's beautifully
Yeah,
executed in the finest of
yeah.
yarns. And yes, I
Just
completely.
great clothes.
And actually, their footwear is really good
Yeah.
too.
And also, I think it's the kind of thing for me, who you're going to find this hard to believe, but I'm over 30. It's the kind of thing that you can wear as a mature man and not feel like you're kind of running to catch up.
Do you have a high street favourite?
I used to. I mean, we used to go when the kids were very young. We would go to stay with the in-laws who had a house in Spain, and we would go there 2 or 3 times a year. And one of the first things I would do, we'd make a trip to Zara, spend, and I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, not because of the brand, but because of the sort of turnover. I'd spend €200 and I get a load of clothes for all of us, and they were all fine, and we'd wear them for a couple of weeks, and then you probably never wear them again. I mean, that's the inherent problem with
Yeah.
fashion and fast
Yeah.
fashion, of course, we know that. But I did used to think, when I took notice of it, that Zara was a really, really good brand.
And Massimo Dutti?
It's okay. I think Massimo Dutti is probably trying to do what Brunello Cucinelli does well.
Yes.
That I
For
would say that's
multiples of.
yeah.
Yes. Talking about sustainability and how fashion is made, do you ever find yourself thinking about the person that's actually made your item of clothing that you're putting on?
I think it's impossible not to now. I remember having these conversations about 20 years ago, and I think we all paid lip service to it then. We all knew it was important, but I don't think any of us really cared or really knew anything about it. But I think as we've seen manufacturing change geographically over the years, just moving around for somewhere cheaper in terms of construction, I think it's very difficult not to. The problem is that you're in an industry which has built-in obsolescence. Fashion, by its very nature, by dint of what it is all about obsolescence. It's in, it's out, and
Is it less
that is
so?
a problem.
Is that less so for men's? Do you feel?
Well, yes and no, because now I would say that menswear is as interesting from an aesthetic point of view, and has as much variety as women does. So actually, I think that, that as women's wear. So I think women's wear and menswear have the same faults actually in that respect. So as menswear has become more ubiquitous and more successful over the last couple of generations, so it's an inherent problem.
I won't ask you the next question then. Do you
No, go on.
do you ever buy vintage?
What, old stuff?
Yes, old stuff.
Yeah, I do.
Favorite haunts?
I like old sort of Belstaff, Barber stuff like
Yeah.
that, country stuff. I
Yeah.
think.
And where do you find that?
There's a brilliant place in Hay on Wye, where we have a house that's got a vintage store. Becky Bain's place, which is fantastic. Mainly for women, but they have the odd men's thing. I'm not a great consumer. I don't go shopping for clothes. It's when you're in a particular place and you see something, you buy it. The only time I can remember really doing that, we were on holiday in Rome a couple of years ago, and for some reason I got the shopping bug, and I just spent an absolute fortune by pair of who buys pink trousers on holiday? You notice I didn't wear those today, right?
I'm really glad you didn't. Really glad you didn't. Do you have one item of clothing that really means the most to you?
I think that the couple of things I've kept from the 80s. I mean, that Vivienne Westwood pirate top, which is 43 years old, and actually one of my kids has got it. I don't know where it is, but yeah, I have some affection for that because it is old, and I was younger then, and it was fun. But I think I wouldn't call it affection, but the things I like are the things I wear all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that nowadays I'll wear a very smart jacket, formal shirt, some good shoes, and a pair of jeans. And I like it's that hardy perennial of like finding the perfect pair of jeans.
And where is your perfect pair of jeans from?
It's always somewhere different.
Really?
Yeah, I used to love silver tag Levi's, and then they changed. And then you find another one, and then they change, and it's weird because your one's body changes, the older you get. So my body is very different from what it was 10 years ago, etc.
So not in your 28-inch waist.
Unfortunately, not. So I think my life sartorially has been a constant struggle to find the perfect pair of jeans.
And what are you in today?
These are Ralph Lauren, actually. They only cost £1 million. Actually, I was given them. What can I say?
On that note, let's go to some quick-fire questions.
Yeah.
High end or high street?
High end.
Savile Row or off the peg?
Savile Row. What a rude question.
I knew the answer to that. Minimalism or maximalism?
I think a bit of both, actually. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you and tell you a story. I went to a fancy dress party once, right?
I forgot to ask you about fancy dress.
Okay, well, this is the question. About 15 years ago, I went to a fancy dress party in some private members club off the Strand. It was someone's birthday, fancy dress. Can't remember what I was wearing. But anyway, there was this guy who looked ridiculous. He had like this crazy suit on, big shirt, looked mental. And I said, "Who have you come as?" And he said, "I come as the editor of GQ." Oops.
And did you tell him who you were?
Of course I did. Yeah.
And what was his reaction?
He laughed. It was funny.
So minimalism or maximalism?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, bit of both.
One off or bog off?
Oh, buy one, get one free. Why would you not? Come on.
Crocs, cute or puke?
Oh, no, that's sackable offence.
Sports luxe or rock and roll?
Probably sports luxe, I think.
Glam or grunge?
Glam.
Jeans or chinos?
Jeans.
Trend or style?
Style.
Colour or monochrome?
Monochrome.
Pattern or plain?
Plain.
Experimental or uniform?
Uniform.
Cashmere or cotton?
Always cashmere.
Hoarder or editor?
Oh, terrible hoarder.
Charity shop or resale?
Probably both, actually.
Budgie smugglers or board shorts?
That's a really personal question.
Well, you're very
rude
glad
of you.
I've taken out the one about briefs or boxers then, aren't you?
Never budgie smugglers.
So you're a board short man.
I mean, budgie smugglers when I was much younger and much thinner, no problem.
But it was
Not
the
now.
70s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
And finally, beanie or Baker Boy?
Ooh. Baker Boy.
And one very last question.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
Yeah.
what do you or don't you wear in bed?
I don't.
As naked as the day you were born. Dylan Jones, what a treat and what a pleasure
Oh, thank
to
you. It's fun.
spend this time chatting with
Ditto.
you about
Ditto.
all things sartorial. Thank you.
Pleasure.